Yeah, so we're going to talk about waterfowl. We probably have like some mixed, everybody's experience level is, and so anytime like we're introducing any topic, I kind of have like a communication and safety talk that I like to do, and I think it's just a good refresher, especially since it looks like everybody's an adult in this virtual room. And sometimes adults are the absolute worst people at communicating, especially on safety. And as everybody knows, shotguns are very difficult to tell if there's a shell in the chamber or a hammerback, or if they're in the safe position depending on your angle. And a semi-automatic shotgun is probably one of the most common weapons out there in the world today. So I've been in a bunch of different situations that have been scary, and oddly enough, they've all been both youth shotgun related and adult shotgun related. Most recently, I was in like a sunken prefab welded pit blind on a rice check in the Sacramento Valley, and was just talking with a friend of mine, and the dog slid in there and knocked his shotgun over, and it slid down and landed flat on the bottom of the blind. And we had two young hunters in there aside from myself. I don't care what you are, you don't want to get pellets at any range. And so communication around firearms and shotguns and any hunting situation, is always great and highly encouraged. And the first thing I always tell everybody is you just got to make it part of what you start out with when you get in the field. You can't ever be intimidated by who has all the hunting experience, or who brought the most dogs, or who brought lunch, or any of it. It's always good, and it will always be respected at the end of the day. If you say, hey, typically this falls on the shoulders of whoever has the spot, whoever rounded up everybody to go hunting. You're meeting at the gas station at 3:30, 4 a.m. in the morning. It's good to just get it out of the way, out of the gate, and just say, hey, this is kind of my thing. I want all shotguns to be in the case as we get in the boat or we walk out to the blind. Shotguns can just stay in the case. We'll have coffee. We'll set out decoys. And there's just not going to be any shotgun shells in the shotguns, no matter their design, until 2 minutes or a minute until legal shooting light. And if you're staying out all day, those shells are definitely out of the chamber. I tend to err towards a couple minutes before legal shooting light is over. Specifically with semi-automatic shotguns, if you really want to let people know that thing is safe, I like to pull the action back, and that shell that ejects, I just stop it. So the base of the shell is actually holding the action open, and it is highly visible. There's no way for that firearm to operate unless you're some crazy situation. But that's just a great way of doing things. It sets a really good example. And, when we stop to think about what we can lose in these situations, nothing stacks up or compares to getting a duck, or in my case, a shot at a duck, versus possibly injuring or scaring the heck out of somebody or ending up with deaf ears like I have. So over communicate. It's always appreciated. It doesn't matter who you're with. And if for some reason it's not, that's probably not somebody you need to be hunting with. Waterfowl hunting is actually the way that I got into hunting. It's the first hunting I ever experienced. My family, they definitely wouldn't be in the category of really even serious hunters, but this was a social thing that my grandpa and his group of friends started, and it kind of got a little less serious with every generation that joined in. There was a very good safety element to it and learning element to it, and the learning and the questions were encouraged, and it was a really cool, fun thing. And there's everything a little kid could want, and like lots of dogs and lots of old guys talking about stuff that you're not supposed to hear because you're on a hunting trip, and lots of food and snacks, and it was a really good time. So we started out just hunting geese, and that was the only acceptable waterfowl species to hunt, was just Canada geese. It all took place on the Flathead River here in Montana, which is a big, wide river. And we had this very organized system of jump shooting. So no decoys, but it was oftentimes elaborate. We had the entire river named. If geese would raft up in a certain spot, chances are we had a name for it, and we had a name for the type of organized sneak that we would do, and we'd divide into groups. And one group, consisting of the bulk of the shotguns, would either take a boat or a long walk and get set up on a bend of the river or an island. And then the other group would gently worry the geese. And this would sometimes take well over an hour. And you'd hear the geese start to wind up and get more nervous and get more nervous. And then eventually they'd start to lift off, and they would sit very, very low, more of like I'm flying out of annoyance versus necessity. And it would put them right over the top of the bulk of the shotguns on the island or the bend of the river. And it was very social. It was very fun. It was very coordinated, and actually took a lot of repetition and this kind of multi-generational knowledge. And in order for the next generation to be effective at this form of goose hunting, it took really good communication to pass down those skills of where to be on the river, what's happening with the wind, what the geese are most likely to do. And, that's just not a form of hunting that really gets talked about. Although, I do believe it is common, but, typically what we see are these like giant decoy trailers, tens of thousands of dollars worth of decoys, and big elaborate spreads. And, we had probably more gear than your average high school kid, but not that much more, right? Definitely some good dogs that weren't going to capsize a boat in a very cold, dangerous river with chunks of ice coming down it. But plenty of skill, certainly with what to shoot and what not to shoot. And one thing that I see over and over and over again, which has kind of become a pet peeve of mine, is knowing your range. Doesn't matter what kind of shotgun you shoot, but you definitely need to know your effective range. You're not going to spend your time chasing crippled birds if you know your range. You're going to know what you can drop dead and effective. You're not going to wear out your dog. You're not going to have your dog gone when the next flight of birds comes in because it's off chasing some crippled bird. You're going to knock more dead birds right in their tracks, right where they need to be, where you can wait out and get them, or where a good, ideally in my mind, Labrador Retriever can go out and grab them. So that's kind of my rant, my opening rant. We have several folks from First Lite on here that are going to help kind of coordinate any questions. Oh, there we go.
Okay. When to call, when not to call.
If you don't know, somebody the next blind down will tell you. Yeah, it's a great question. You definitely have to take the temperature of the birds, and hopefully you're going to be in a situation.
Look at we're talking.
There's enough birds around to where you'll be able to make a few mistakes. I certainly always do, but I just start out low and simple and get more complicated and confident as the flights go on. And I've had days where there's zero reaction first thing in the morning, and at noon almost any sound you make, you can watch those necks make a 90-degree turn towards the sound. And so, all this hunting, unfortunately, there's no like golden rule. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, always this is what happens. I've seen enough antelope jump fences and turkeys cross 3-pronged barbed wire fences and do all the things that things aren't supposed to do to know that I just shouldn't talk about that. So you just got to be vigilant and go in there with the mindset that this is a very dynamic situation. And part of the fun is figuring out what those animals want sometimes that hour of that day versus what they wanted that day, or this is what worked for me that season. If you really break it down, there's just a lot going on. But that's kind of my tactic, is start low, simple, see how birds react to the spread. If you're in a situation on some of those big bluebird days, high pressure days, and I love to call, and I have a single reed call that is very high pitched, and it really pushes the sound. And if there's not that much happening, I'm going to try to hit those far ranging birds and just see if there's a reaction, because there's just not that much to lose if birds aren't low cruising the river, or you're not getting groups coming in on a still body of water too. So be quiet, and I wouldn't say cautious. That's definitely the wrong word. When ducks are comfortable, they're not being cautious. They're talking confidently to each other about, hey, this is my space, that's my food. They're relaxed and they're making quite a bit of noise. But if you're not hearing hailing calls from hens, like big obnoxious hens, you may not want to start out with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
First, thanks for putting this on. And then question is, assuming you're not in a situation with fixed blind positions that you draw into, what are like the top 3 things you look for when scouting a new location and determining where you're going to have your blind at?
Oh boy, that's a fantastic question. Number one, by far and away, if it's the spot, you can throw away everything else and you just got to get there. And the spot is, if those birds are tucked in there and you've seen them for, if they're those confident birds that are relaxed, they're not in this super tight wad sitting there with their heads up. There's ducks doing, the whole range of things that you see in the stinking Cabela's catalog of decoys, right? There's ducks in every position. They're enjoying life. Those ducks, and there's a lot of them, you gotta be in that spot. Now, if there are an equal distribution of birds, or you can't get on that spot, but you have some choices of spots, if I could draw it up, when the sun comes up, it's not going to be staring right in the blind. That's just going to make all of your mistakes in camouflage or lack of camouflage sometimes, or that one decoy that you really should have matted down with just a little spritz of black spray paint, really stand out. And you're gonna lose some birds to some of those mistakes if you're getting that full bright morning sun when it finally peaks out. So if I had my pick, that sun's gonna come up and I'm gonna stay in a shadow. I like spots where I can get either a little bit of current, or I'm gonna be able to pick up some wind. Those are typically the spots that are going to stay open later in the season if you're in a part of the country that isn't going to ice up right away. So that's kind of a twofold thing. That's going to be hopefully a good spot that day, and it's going to be a good spot that you come back to later in the season. So a little bit of current, a little bit of wind exposure. A duck on the water is not very tall. So one thing to keep in mind is they need, about mid-shin height to get out of the wind. So what may not look like a big windbreak to you, I've seen a lot of ducks tucked into not much. And if you can get in and utilize a layout blind sometimes, if it's a really good spot and you're dedicated, you can tote a shovel in and sling some mud around when it's real dark, and sling some gravel around and make some shallow depressions too in those really exposed areas. And that can be phenomenally fun wing shooting, because a duck gets into that exposed stuff and they think that they can see everything. And so you get really confident birds coming in out of the wind, and it's in a spot where they think, they can see every predator around.
My question is, we hunt a blind up just south of Chico, and we're hunting flooded rice fields. And all around us is those dry fields where all those snows are constantly. And our spread's just kind of a mix of snows and greenheads and widgeon and teal. And so what I'm getting at is, what kind of spread are you putting out or recommending for? Because those snows, they're not wanting to land on water, really. So how do you kind of pull them in with also still getting the ducks to take a look at your spread?
Man, for me, I don't think mixing them is effective. I like a defined patch of snow geese. Now, not tight. I just do not think that tight birds are relaxed, calm birds. Tight birds are the birds that just got there and they don't know exactly what's going on, or they're bunching up to leave. So I like a decent amount of spacing in my birds. But I do think that running those snows, like if you could think of like 2 crescent moons, and they're overlapping about 30%. And your one crescent moon is your snow geese, and your other crescent moon is kind of your mix of ducks. That's what I've seen for me be the best. You know, even the best snow goose guys I've been around, they typically honestly say the same thing, right? It's like, it's going to work or it's not. And it doesn't matter if you have 80 grand worth of decoys. You know, one of the guys that I got a chat with for a long time in the Sacramento Valley, between his guides and himself, they had over $500,000 in decoys in the valley.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just not honestly anything I even want a part of. That's too much.
Yeah.
But you know, I think if you can make, I mean, I had some great hunts. Canada's and snows are different for sure. But I had some great goose hunts with 6 decoys this year in fields, you know, with, you know, 1,000 geese in one field to the left of me, and you know, several hundred more in other groups. And you're probably not going to get the early morning flights when the big birds are bunched up. But as those bunches start to break up into smaller groups of, we're going to pick up and go get some water, we're going to pick up and just move and find a different social group, those smaller groups you can definitely make a limit out of, and great ones to work on your calling and see those reactions in a more defined way than in working the big groups. So, but you know, I also lean into like the big J hook formation, and I'll run geese on the leg of the J and run ducks in the hook of the J. And I'm sure you can flip-flop that. And but you know, I've had good success there too. But I like keeping, for whatever reason, like definitely more so with snows than with Canada's, like a little bit more definition between those two groups. Long-winded answer, but that's what I got for you.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. It's tough too, because being here in California, they're seeing all kinds of spreads all the way from Canada and getting shot at. So by the time they get to us, they've smartened up quite a bit. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you know, I've talked to. It seems to really vary from everyone around the country, but you know, I've had folks in South Dakota. I mean, they would stand up to you in a fist fight over the fact that the only snow geese that you're going to kill are the birds of the year. And anything that's survived beyond a year, you know, they're just too smart, and it doesn't matter where you hunt them. But you know, I've talked to other guys that are, you know, they're killing 20 to 25-year-old birds regularly every season. So.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm an adult onset hunter.
Awesome.
So I'm 31, started 3 years ago. So I'm just curious, like, what general tips do you have for a new waterfowler?
The waterfowl scene is very broken up. Like my example of growing up, we had, you know, a big group of guys. We jumped geese. Nobody even, you know, people had goose decoys and some duck decoys, but they just rarely made it out of the garage. I think you're going to do a lot better if you fixate on the animal versus the gear. As Ross is on here, Hagerman, Idaho has this, you know, refuge right in town. And I used to go with my 2 Labradors and go sit in that refuge and work on, keeping the dogs at whoa, and just work on my calling and work on my calling and work on my calling. And those birds are very used to having people there, and you can hear the range of noises that those birds make. Highly suggest that. You can do that any time of year, and you see all sorts of really cool stuff and really bizarre behavior that you wouldn't expect, and it's absolutely well worth your time. So fixate on the animal, not so much on the gear. Is going to put you, if you know behavior better than the other 3 blinds down the river, you're going to do well. If you aren't locked into a ton of gear, you're going to be a heck of a lot more mobile and more willing to try other things. Sometimes we all are like, man, got this jet boat and the wife hates it, and I kind of feel like I got to use it every weekend to justify it taking up the spot in the garage or the driveway. And if it's not a duck boat, it's the 10 dozen decoys or whatever, right? So I still do well and know a lot of guys who do really well by looking at, Onyx is a phenomenal tool. Onyx mapping. If you don't have Onyx, Google Earth is a phenomenal tool. And man, throw a couple of decoys that you can pick up off Craigslist or wherever. Spend a couple of bucks hitting the shiny spots with a rattle can, and throw them in your backpack, and hike into some potholes and some different stuff, and set your expectations with. It'd be great to get a headshot mallard and fully pluck that thing and have a phenomenal meal versus I got to get 7 ducks or whatever the limit may be. Or your goal is going to be to turn a flock of ducks with the call. Stuff like that. There's so many things in the list of skills that are so much fun, and it feels really good when you're in a blind full of people and somebody turns to you and they're like, holy shit, you can call. I've never seen a duck turn like that. It's great, but it takes a lot of work, and it's a musical instrument, working on dog and stuff like that. So set your expectations where they need to be. With all this stuff, a little bit of extra sweat equity will really get you ahead of a lot of people. So, do you have anything that's really wearing on you, Michael?
I mean, all my friends are the ones that have the gear, so I don't have to worry about decoys or anything. So if I'm going with them, with who I'd be going with, they'll have it. So I just ask them where they want me to put it and set everything up. I have 2 labs that I would love to have as bird dogs just to get more invites to hunts. I don't think they work because they're too skittish. But yeah, my friend has a big old pond with a bunch of ducks and stuff, so I know I could go out there and try chattering with them.
Right. Yeah, man. I mean, there is no substitute for time in the field. There's no substitute for time in the field. I've hunted with guys that have the most expensive duck club memberships that you could ever think of, and they couldn't hunt their way out of a paper bag because they're there for 20 minutes when they decide to go hunt. They have no real time in the field. Like, you're going to learn a lot more by sitting out there and kind of getting kicked in the teeth a couple of times. And don't give up on the dogs either. I had a lab that shed hunted every season of her entire life and never picked up a shed until she was 10 years old and just decided to finally do it. So one good trick with skittish dogs is lay that shotgun next to the food bowl for Labradors. So they got to smell that gun oil and burnt powder every time they go to eat.
Yeah, he's just really skittish. Like someone shuts the car door a block over when we go out to the bathroom, and he stops mid number 2, and the other one could care less. He's just hard-headed, we'll say. Like how much time and stuff does it take to actually train the dog? Because I know it's a healthy investment, but
Twice a day, every day.
For how long?
Year dedication, twice a day, every day. And maybe you'll end up being like, this dog loves the couch for a good reason, but typically something will click in, and working breeds, they love to work, and sometimes it just takes them a while to figure out what work is. So you got two great excuses to spend a lot of time outside, if nothing else. So yeah. Adam.
Hey, very cool. This is awesome. I have a question. So in the dog world here, so I got my first chocolate lab 10 years ago. So she just turned 10. And just got looking for some points on hunting with the senior dog now, when it's time for me to maybe, sunset that career, and, anything related to an older dog now. She's super good in the field, but she gets home and, it's 3-4 days. She's exhausted, she's sore, the arthritis kicks in. So curious what you have to say about that, and any tips with hunting with a senior dog now.
Just make every hunt their best hunt. You owe it to them. They
Right.
be out there. And, definitely you can cheat a little bit, and not feel bad about it. But, yeah, I mean, it's so tough. It's so tough to watch that happen. But, I think any good vet will tell you that there's people that treat their dog in a way that is more of a reflection of themselves versus doing what's fair to the dog. And you just got to be the person that's doing what's fair to the dog. Like, the dog wants to go, and you can make that happen. But what the repercussions are too. So you just got to set aside days or afternoons, and realize that dog doesn't necessarily need to get a bunch of retrieves in, but the act of going, not seeing you take off with all the stuff that they're aware of, they know what's going on, is probably way more painful watching you leave than going out and sitting in a blind and just watching birds.
Sure.
Right. So you can definitely get those old dogs out after you've filled your limit with a young dog too.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah. The career's sunsetting here, and just want to make the most of it and still give her those, those good times. What's that?
You have a puppy yet?
Nope, not yet.
Yeah, man. Biggest mistake I've ever made. Like, I am dogless. I have been for, I don't know, the longest I've ever been in my entire life. And it sucks. Had I seen this whole COVID-19 thing coming, I would have bought the most expensive frickin' puppy on the planet. So I finally got time to train one again.
Yeah.
I have seen, almost without exception, incredible new life injected into a cantankerous old bird dog by throwing a puppy in the mix. Like, it's pretty interesting, but that doesn't fix old hips too, but can fix an attitude pretty darn well.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Who else been waiting long?
Up in Steamboat Springs, and we get some pretty cold weather here in the duck season pretty early. And I actually get to hunt a bunch with one of your First Lite members, Cody.
Nice.
And late in the season, I can't get him out anymore. He just doesn't want to go out in the cold and -15 with my new hunting lab. And just looking for any tips you have. I've got a hard charging British lab that just is fearless. He'll go out -20. We'll break ice. We'll do it all. And we probably hunt 50, 60 days a year just in Steamboat alone. But it's slim pickings. And I was just wondering if you got any like cold weather tips for decoys or cold weather setups or anything to get those sort of local ducks or those final guys passing through, heading over probably to the eastern plains like Nebraska and stuff, just to get a little bit more action. We 1, 2 a day is pretty good for us after October, November, but the addiction's there. The dog won't let me not sleep in past 4, so happy to go, but we definitely spend some days not getting any to come in or not seeing them. That's one thing, but if we could just get a few tips on the cold weather stuff, if possible, just to break the monotony a little bit. Maybe Cody would come back out with me again.
Yeah, for dog first, there's no substitute for making that dog sleep outside for putting on a cold weather coat. It's very hard, and I got really soft with it, but it is a night and day difference if you let that dog sleep outside. Obviously, a nice insulated kennel's great, but the under fur that they will put on it is a night and day difference. So if you're worried about the comfort of your dog or the safety of your dog, that is a simple, inexpensive thing that you can do. And man, yeah, labs especially, they just get bulletproof. The tolerance is incredible. Boy, it gets tough, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Other than, if I'm really being honest, other than burning a lot of gas and just having a bunch of spots and keeping tabs on it, it's pretty tough to go to the same spot and just cross your fingers and hope that some migrators might pick your little pinhole on the map and drop in. You need to find those spots where a new group coming through decided to rest. And again, it's just burning gas, because I just don't know of, I've been in fields on field hunts, hunting birds that have been in the same field for 4, 5, 6 days, and have watched those same birds take off on the river and decide to leave town, and you don't get any of those birds to suck into the field, whether it's been shot or not. So yeah, it's probably not the answer you wanted, but at that point too, go jump ducks. Like if you're trying to get ducks for the dog, and old Ranella, the only bird I have ever seen him marinate is a goldeneye, and they taste damn good.
That's all we got left in November. It's just hundreds of goldeneyes.
Yeah, so
we burn a lot of gas, and it's really all about the dogs. So just hitting those spots and then jumping them late it's just awesome to watch them work. And I don't like ending the season, once the goods leave. So it's good advice. It's sound advice, and that's definitely what we've been up to the last couple seasons. So appreciate it.
Those goldeneyes, if you're in a spot where you can get them to decoy, they'll make you a hell of a wing shot too. Like they're acrobatic. It sounds like but they're a gorgeous bird. They're acrobatic. And if that's what you have, you just gotta figure it out. Like I said,
to not make them taste like fish.
Man, yeah, and Ranella he just marinates them in teriyaki sauce a lot of times and hits them on the grill, and they're great. And we did, right before all this junk set in, we went and spoke at the Bemidji State College Ducks Unlimited chapter, and it was really, really cool. Bemidji State's like 1,600 people, the college, and they compete fundraising wise and like volunteer hour wise with like Texas A&M and Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech,
Minnesota,
and they're dedicated, man. And the kids that I talked to there, it was like they had never been exposed to anyone ever looking down on shooting a goldeneye or a merganser. They're like, oh man, yeah, it had killer shoot the other day, and super stoked about it. So they're figuring it out. And
they're awesome birds for sure, and they decoy well up here, and they stay super, super late. So it's fun for sure. Nothing against them at all. It's just you're working hard to get those couple shots, but man, they are fast and they make you a better shooter. So
yeah, and you're doing it for the dog, right? It's great.
So that's all we ever do, stuff for the dog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming.
Hey Cal, thanks for coming out this evening. You mentioned earlier in your opening rant about different combos for waterfowling guns in terms of chokes and shells and things like that. And I always find myself having this conversation a couple times throughout the season. But what are your thoughts on 3.5-inch shells? Is it overkill or necessary tool in the arsenal?
Man, I was convinced that you had to have them. And I haven't purchased, ordered, whatever, a box of 3.5-inch shells for a long time. Not even for turkeys. I was just laughing because a buddy of mine spends more on each shell per turkey than he does for a shell per elk or per deer or per sheep. And I'm like, how does that make sense?
Yeah, those 3.5s are pretty pricey.
Yeah. So, and there is, it's a pretty inefficient shell. It puts a lot of shot out there. But if it's tough, man. Like extended, super constricted, like Strangler or Pattern Master, or way more expensive choke tubes are fun to shoot. You can definitely reach out and shoot things. You got to practice. But man, when things click and things are going great, it's a crappy choke tube to have in your shotgun, unless you can tell me that you're really good at taking heads off of ducks at, right when they're in the pocket at 15, 20, 25 yards,
And those 3.5s pack a punch too. So after a long day, it wears on your shoulder a little bit.
Yeah. You're throwing a lot of freight out there. So yeah. More and more, I'm shooting a modified choke for just about everything. I shot a lot of 3s this year and had great great results on Canada geese and waterfowl too, and ran into some guys in South Dakota that once they start shooting something, typically it's a number 2 or number 3 in 3-inch, that they will never switch up. And like I said, I had incredible results on geese with number 3 steel shot, and out of modified choke this year, And, you know, you got to break some birds down to prevent a long walk, but all the data says is it is the number of pellets that matters. The number of pellets on a target that matters.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
A couple questions. I'm up here in upstate New York. My in-laws have a lake house on one of the Finger Lakes, about 10 miles south of a national wildlife refuge. So a good amount of birds are usually going pretty high. My issue is it's a lake house, right? There's a beach. So you talked about digging into gravel. I'd like to hear a little more about that as the first part. The best thing I found is to literally dig in a layout blind, and I wind up kind of wet and dirty the whole time. Just wondering if there's a different way to do that. Second question, you know, New York's got some kind of tough gun laws, but we've got some pretty good conservation laws in terms of the amount of state land we have available. So to go back to the OnX idea, what's the top, you know, 1, 2, 3 things you're looking for to try to scout out a new spot digitally?
Man, all great stuff. But first thing I wanted to ask you, you're not throwing out 50-pound sacks of corn up there?
No.
Yeah. There's a really good poaching story that I threw in the podcast from upstate New York a couple episodes ago. But I mean, it sounds like you got a great situation. You know, typically what I am looking for is something that'll be just a little bit more effort. If you feel like the birds that you are hunting are coming off a refuge and you have a general sense for their flight path, obviously you'd like to be in the flight path. The other thing that I would pay attention to is elevation. You know, birds are efficient. You know, a mallard duck flies on average about 26 miles an hour, 27 miles an hour. But they'll cover 800 miles in 8 hours because they are a very efficient bird. If they can find a tailwind, they're going to stick in it. And they can't travel 800 miles without dying unless they're not flapping the entire time. So I look at elevation, and if that big refuge system is, you know, drastically different than some of the spots that you're looking at, like the ideal situation, right, is you're going to find something a little that's on the same elevation or slightly less, and it's going to be hopefully in that flight path. It's going to be something easy where they get up to their kind of cruising altitude and they're not going to have to make some kind of drastic maneuver to go check out your spot or your spread. You can tell a lot. You know, if you're a fisherman, there's some other applications out there that you can use to look at the actual topography of a pond or a lake. But just using like OnX or Google Earth, like if I'm looking at still bodies of water, specifically, like looking at that color transition that shows that it's not just some glacial hole. Glacial holes just aren't going to create a lot of feed. So they're probably not going to historically have a lot of waterfowl that are hanging out there. You need some milfoil, or you need some portion that is going to grow some feed when it gets some sunlight, you know? And so I'd be looking for a big tail out, or, you know, some sort of color change that says, yeah, it's worth, you know, peeling off the state road and walking into. Also, there's like those intermittent streams intermittent bodies of water, ponds, stuff like that, that may look dry. But if you're paying attention to what's happening in your area, they could very well fill up just because of the last rainstorm. And those intermittent areas, that's some of the best food a duck or a goose could ask for. Just like in Wyatt's, he was talking about those rice fields. A brand new flooded rice field will not hold waterfowl like a rice field that's been flooded for 7, 8, 9, 10 days. Because it takes a little bit of water sitting there to get that decomposition to start. And once that decomposition starts, then all the invertebrate life comes up, and all of a sudden there's a ton of food there. And you can also get like a little bit of fermentation in the seed pods and stuff like that too. So, and higher sugar content is better caloric intake for anything. And so, it takes a couple of seasons, takes some work, but some of that intermittent stuff that looks dry could be some of the best hunting you've ever had. I long time ago, I actually hunted with the whole like duck commander crew here in Montana. And at that point we had the largest, or I guess the most single sequence of dead ducks falling out of one group that they had ever had in the history of the duck commander. And that was in a spot outside of Dillon, Montana, that I have looked at for 12, 13, 14 years now, however long it's been, and it's never had more than a drop of water in it since that shoot. But it had flooded then. We went out and we're just kind of cruising around and checked on it, knocked on a door, walked out, looked at this flooded grass, and there were 3 duck feathers. We had nothing else going on. And so we went out there early the next morning, and about 9:30 in the morning, several hundred ducks that were very, very comfortable going to that spot came in, and 5 of us shot 3 times, and silly amount of ducks fell out of the air, and never saw another duck all day. And again, I've never seen a 1/4 inch water in that spot since then. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that timing is helpful.
And thoughts on trying to hide in a beach where there's nowhere to hide?
Man, you always want to be a good representative of hunting. So as long as you're not going to tick anybody off, shovel.
It's my mother and father-in-law. They're cool with it.
Great, yeah, man.
And they're vegetarians, so they don't even want the meat.
Yeah, perfect. Shovel, and then also, if you can get an idea of the different types of vegetation on that beach, not just at your mother and father-in-law's place, as long as it's not like some invasive species that you're going to be labeled a jerk for the rest of your life for bringing in. Like if you can identify common vegetation elsewhere, you can bring it into that spot, and it may not work on the group of birds that were there that first morning, but the birds are going to get used to it.
Great. Thank you, man.
Cap us off. You covered a lot of cool stuff, Cal, but my 2 questions, the first one that I was curious about is why, when you were a kid growing up, was it only Canada geese and nothing else? And then to quote your buddy Steven Ranella, if God came down and put a gun to your head and told you could only cook waterfowl one way, how would you do it?
Since this last one, as long as nobody's aching to bail, I'll give you the full version here. So, you know, out of that group of folks, and you know, my family, they were all into organized athletics. I was kind of the runt of the litter, and probably would have been better off just left to go hunt and fish instead of playing football. But this is all like football coaches and their kids, and it was just like very few of them knew how to cook anything. And I think after years of doing this and looking back on it, you know, it was like the Canada geese were not that plentiful. It took some effort. The haul was never a lot. And I think everybody was very okay with that. It was maybe like a higher trophy for trophy-oriented folks. And, you know, there was a couple of them that were very good, and they were taking the hearts and the livers and plucking birds. But the first goose that I knocked down, you know, I ended up with it, a single parent home at the time, and shocked at how much meat is on a Canada goose. And, you know, I'd cooked the thing and had some bites that I was proud of, and had a lot more bites that I was like, my God, this is, I don't know if I should shoot any more of these things.
Yeah.
But, you know, honestly, being almost out of dogs, like going through like Adam, your situation with really old dogs, and having friends that were still out hunting ducks, is where I really got into cooking ducks.
Mm-hmm.
And I, because of that old dog with crippled hips bringing me birds, I cherished each of those birds a lot more, and I spent a lot more time figuring that out. And, you know, man, yeah, mallard duck is a pretty amazing thing, and it is the thing in my freezer that I know I can convert a non-game eater or a game hater into being a game lover with a mallard duck. Part of it's psychological because of like the stigma around it. They're like, oh, ducks taste like mud, or ducks whatever, you know. I can like write the script out right now, but I can convert somebody into a game lover immediately, and spouses of either sex, if they're with their companion that is a hunter, it's pretty amazing. Like, I've seen it firsthand where they're like, so you can just go out and get these for free. You know, and you can just see like the wheels turning, right? Pluck your birds, and typically at this point, like if I want to put on a big show, I'll pluck the whole bird and I'll roast a whole bird, which is just slightly more tricky because the damn thing is not a perfect surface, right? But indirect heat is your friend on that. So like, you know, those pellet grills are great because they're a crappy grill. There's not a lot of heat coming off the grill.
Yeah.
It's a big oven. That's why a pellet grill is so great for wild game. It gives you this wide range to work with. It's like, you know, it's the crock pot version of a barbecue. It's the bachelor's friend, right? You don't need a whole lot of skill set. You're going to get in the ballpark and it's going to be pretty darn good. But you can just take shears, pruning shears, and cut the whole spine out. And then crack the rib cage open, take a frying pan, smash that thing as flat as possible. And that's a good way of doing it after you've plucked that. Or, you know, like that spatchcock method of you cut in and you pop that hip joint you continue up and fillet the breast over. The fancy way of doing it, I like to keep that skin over the breast connected. So you actually have this connected bird, but it's essentially deboned with the exception of the leg bones. And it's very pretty. I like to leave the feet on too, because I just think it looks sweet and they kind of curl up on the grill. And I like forcing people into the mental connection that is a duck. But that's not for everybody, right? But what that does is that is a totally flat surface. The advantage of cooking it with the bones is you, again, have more indirect heat because the bones are there protecting the meat even more. So you do the bulk of your hot cooking, bone side down, and then you flip it over and just give it like a minute on the meat side, and you're good to go. When that thing's totally flat, you have the advantage of as even a distribution of heat as possible. That's as flat as that duck's ever going to get. And it's the same where I like to start skin side down because you have a little bit of separation, and then flip it over and do the finishing touch on the meat side to the grill. All that I ever put on there, unless I'm getting like very bored, is just a little sheen of oil, because the oil breaks down granulated seasoning. It's a little like barbecue pitmaster tip for you. Oil breaks down that granulated seasoning no matter what it is, and you'll get a more even distribution of flavor. But typically all I do is salt and pepper. Oil, salt and pepper. That's it. Bird's plucked. And it's going to be, a wickedly hot grill, north of 425 for sure. Skin side, about, 2.5 minutes. Flip it over, about 1.5 minutes. And people will fight over those legs when you're doing it right. Let that thing rest. Slice it like slightly diagonal, and people will love it. And then, there's some variations on this, and early season birds, the birds change a lot throughout the year, because their diet changes throughout the year, right? You are what you eat. We know this for an absolute fact through the agricultural industry, which my family's a big part of. You change feed, you get different results. And when those birds first start out, specifically birds of the year, their diet's invertebrates. And it's, maybe 10, 15% plant matter. Mm-hmm. And then as they get later in the season, it completely flips, and their diet is plant matter. If you're in an area that's got a lot of rice and grain and what, they're on those corn sources and grain sources, and they're getting the most bang for the buck that they can. And if there's some bugs around that are eating on top of the corn, they're going to eat those too. But it's going to be 80% that plant matter and 20%, basically bycatch. And so when you're dealing with that big fat rind of like orange, yellow fat on a mallard, then you can take a super sharp knife and make some slits. If you want to impress a lady or impress some family friends that don't eat this stuff, for just having folks over, you can make these little check marks and make it look super pretty. But the point of that, the way that whole thing came about, was to release that fat. So don't make those cuts where there is no fat. So you're going to have these big fat pockets in the hip joints, tons around the neck, and you can make those check marks where that fat's located, and that's to let that oil drain out, and then that skin's going to get crispier. and it's just going to be a nicer finish.
Yeah.
If you don't check that skin and allow that oil a way to render out, that fat to render out, then you're going to have like a little bit more of a rubbery texture to your skin. It probably isn't going to be as palatable for most folks, but man, like right now when I'm cleaning out the freezer, it is all that I can do to not eat every frickin' duck or goose that's in the freezer, because that is all the fat that I get. That, I mean, there's not a single other thing other than like tongues in my freezer that have the fat content that a duck has. Like, to me, that is a ribeye steak in my freezer. That's all the fat I get. And man, I'll give away tenderloins before I give away a fat mallard.
Oh boy. Anybody hunting up there in that Chico area, definitely. I got buddies who own a guiding service up there, and it's freakish how fat those pintails get and everything that they put down. It's crazy.
Yeah. And man, I had great access there. I'm going to go back and figure it out. But you know, it's just like, it's so funny. I've been talking to this rice farmer down there for 7-8 years now. Really good guy. And I ticked him off with something that I said on the podcast, the week in review. And I said, well, listen, man, if the invite's still open and you got a spot in your duck blind, I'll fly down there. You show me what you're talking about, and I'll write a correction on the podcast. And was all excited to go down and get limits of ducks and fill the freezer. You know, it was like this dead still, calm, ultra low on the deck, foggy day. We had literally one snow goose come in over this dude's, you know, by my estimate, 35 grand worth of decoys out there.
Oh boy.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And all the duck I ate when I was down there was last year's duck that the guy was trying to clean out of his freezer.
Oh no.
So it is just funny. Like, you can have all the stuff, and if the conditions aren't right, you know, hunting's just hunting. So, but that's, if it was all a guarantee, I wouldn't do it. So,
yeah.
But yeah, hopefully everybody got something out of this. Hopefully it was fun to do. Yeah, hopefully you guys are all, you know, washing your hands and your faces and staying a good fish length apart from everybody. So thanks for showing up.
Totally. Thank you, everybody.
If you have any questions that didn't get answered, shoot Cal a note. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your email is just askcal@themeateater.com, right?
Yep, askcal@themeateater.com. And yeah, subscribe to the Week in Review for me so I can keep this gig going.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.